Welcome to another LinkedIn Live with me, Claire Braund at Women on Boards. Today we are talking about a topic for the ages. Australia's leading independent non-profit institute dedicated to ageing and aged care research is seeking to appoint 2 board members to fill specialist areas. The institute works to ensure older people are respected, healthy and included. It's something that board member Tracy Comans has devoted much of her professional life to researching and understanding, and she's with me today. So hello, Tracy.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today, Claire.
Oh, it's a total pleasure. It's a topic actually that should interest all of us, but something we like to put off discussing or addressing until we're old. So conversely, I see lots of advertisements for over 50s retirement living, and I wonder who's living in these places, because I'm of the generation that put off children until my mid-30s, so I find myself at 54 with a 19-year-old and a 15-year-old. So can we just clear up here what we're talking about when we use the word aged?
I know, and I think somebody told me a long time ago, and it rings very true, that anyone old is anyone 15 years older than the age that you currently are. So you're never old, right?
I like that. I like that definition.
Yeah, and it rings really true. But look, there's 2 concepts, I guess, aging and then being aged. And, aging happens throughout our lifespan. Your peak vision is about age 12 and it starts deteriorating from then on. So when we think about aging research, we're sort of taking this lifespan approach. But when we think about aged, we have kind of, I guess, societal and policy settings that, set the age pension used to be 65, and we kind of still think of that as retirement age, but it's now 67. And so we have these sort of set ages that kind of delineate people in a way, but it's kind of, I suppose, a bit ageist. And everyone ages differently, and we can actually know now that we can really influence that biological age. And there's some really good news coming out, right? So there's a recent report actually that just came out in June by the IMF, which has talked about sustaining growth in an aging world. And we've had this, this talk around we're going to have this cliff and there's not enough young people to look after the old people. But in fact, people are working longer. But they're not only working longer, but we're in much better health. So they're saying basically 70 is the new 50, and 70-year-olds today have the same cognitive ability level that 50-year-olds had 20 years ago. So we're getting this generational change, which is, probably due to increased education and nutrition and all sorts of things. So, yeah, we need to rethink some of those stereotypes, and, that's part of what we do at the Institute is, trying to bring attention to those issues.
Well, speaking of the Institute, it was established in 1976 and produces evidence, tools and resources to help improve health and aged care systems, some of which you've just spoken about, also influence government policies on ageing and inspire best practice in the health and aged care sector. It's also a very strong advocacy body. So how do you think the Institute's work has influenced our approach to ageing over its almost 50-year history?
Yeah, and it is really interesting, and I've been delving into the archives because we're 50 next year, and we're going to do a few, hopefully a few events around that. And so when the Institute started, there was actually no geriatric medicine in Australia. And so this was recognised, and the University of Melbourne sort of went on an international recruitment and brought over Derek Pringle, who was our first director, to Australia to set up basically geriatric medicine, and also this National Institute it was called Gerontology and Geriatric Research. So I'm glad they changed the name because it was Narigam, and Nari is much nicer. So in its early days, it had a really strong focus on geriatric medicine and I guess developing the field of geriatric medicine as we now know it. But that's now been really taken over by the physicians, and that's well established, and we don't have that focus anymore. But there's always been a strong focus on social gerontology from the very start. So including where people were living and retiring. At the stage when the Institute was set up, we had some sort of aged care homes, but predominantly private. There was no assessment system. There was no way of telling what level people were at or whether they should go to a home. So Nari was really instrumental in setting up what became aged care assessment teams, and this has continued on, and we still have those aged care assessment teams. So, NARI's evolved, I guess, over those years to take more of a role in that end stage implementation and policy research, and less of a focus, I guess, on the clinical, but we still do have that clinical focus as well.
You yourself are described as someone who bridges the gap between evidence and policy in relation to aged care. So can you tell us a bit about your work and your research?
Yeah, so my work's changed quite substantially over the years. I originally trained as a physiotherapist, and I worked for almost 20 years in physiotherapy.
Okay.
I'd also trained in economics. So I guess when I came to do a PhD, and it was kind of one of those serendipitous things, a new service got set up, they had some funding to do research, and I was in a community rehab team. And I really wanted to combine, I guess, this economics thinking with the observations around, how practice was working, and how we might be able to do things better. And so, that's evolved into then, I guess, moving into the academic field. And I've worked really the last 12 years as an academic health economist. So I was at the University of Queensland prior to coming to Melbourne to take up this position at NARI, and I've been at NARI for about a year. But I guess in recent years, sort of this has led me to working with the government around the recommendations, implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission on aged care. And predominantly my work's been around the measurement of quality. So it kind of sounds easy, but it's incredibly difficult. So if you walk into an aged care home, you kind of get a sense of whether it's quality or not, right? The same as if you walk into a hotel or whatever, so you can look at some things. But when we think about clinical quality, what are we going to measure? So that's, we've been working on quality indicators, and some things, people move into residential care, you don't expect to get a pressure injury, you don't expect to fall over. So there are adverse outcomes that we want to avoid that are quality. But how we aggregate them up and, measure quality as a whole is really difficult. So that's, some of the work that I've been doing around that quality agenda.
Speaking of your work, you're on the board at NARI, but you're also working with NARI in a research capacity. Is that correct?
I still have my own research programs. I'm the CEO and director of NARI. So the director sits on the board.
Yep.
So I continue, with some research programs.
So just jumping down a bit now, so that is some of the work of the institute, and then its governance structure. It does have also some independent board members as well.
Yeah, so NARI is what we call an independent medical research institute. So the two types of medical research institutes in Australia, ones where they sit within a university, and then others, so some are quasi-independent, some are quite integrated in universities, and we're a fully independent MRI. So that means we're an independent company, limited by guarantee. We're actually a charitable organisation, and we have an independent board of directors that governs the company.
And how are you funded?
That's a great question. So predominantly we're what we call soft funded. So we're reliant on grant income, and in the past that's predominantly been National Health and Medical Research Council funding or the Medical Research Future Fund. But there's a huge gap between what they will fund and what it costs to run an organisation. So they won't fund any overhead costs or any of the on costs. And then also, our infrastructure costs in terms of IT, cybersecurity, human resources, just the operational costs of running the institute, rent, none of that is covered by grant funding. So we do get some funding also through the Victorian government. They provide funding for all the Victorian independent medical research institutes through the Operational Infrastructure Fund, but that's not covering that gap. So we're trying to diversify what we do to be less reliant on grant funding. And we have actually some amazing intellectual property that's been developed over many years. So grants have been done, we've generated IP, and And previously, being a very benevolent organisation, we've often produced materials or resources and then given them away for free. So there wasn't a structured plan, I guess, to develop the outcomes into products and services that could be implemented and used to generate ongoing income. So a recent example we've got is a training program for home care workers to increase their skills and knowledge in looking after people with dementia and their families. So we co-designed that program, tested it in the field, and basically now it's ready for rollout and we're able to license that program. So we want to move more towards that, and I guess that's why we're looking for some of the skills that we're looking for in those board members.
Yeah, which leads me to speak about that, because you are seeking 2 new non-executive directors, one with skills in the marketing and public relations space, another with skills in the IT strategy and digital transformation. Is that some of the thinking behind the need for adding these skills to your board, the fact that you do need to diversify funding streams?
Absolutely. So we've just completed our new strategic plan that's now in place for the next 5 years. And we've done a full board review and looked at the skills, and we've looked at, where we want to go to in the future. And so we're in a growth phase, and we need to grow to achieve what we've set ourselves to do over the next 5 years. And we also need to grow in the recognition that at the size we are at the moment, we're very vulnerable. So we're one of the small MRIs. So we really want, as I said, that marketing skills around what we're thinking about in terms of our research, and thinking about it very early on. When we get a grant, what's the final outcome going to be? What might we be doing with that in the future? And then obviously IT and cybersecurity is something that every organisation needs to think more about. And then we have, obviously the AI coming in and how we might use that to inform research going forward. So I think, really those skills are what is needed in order to drive our reform and drive where we want to go.
Really interesting. So, final question: why would someone enjoy serving on the board of the National Ageing Research Institute?
Well, I hope they'd enjoy it. I mean, like I said, we're a small institute and we're very much a values-based institute. So, our values really guide what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And we have this group of people who are really committed to our vision and mission. So, we want people to, age well, be healthy, respected, included, and have the opportunity to age well. So I think that vision talks to everyone. We all want to age well. We all want to fix the system so that we get to the end and the system is working well. And look, there's been huge improvements. We've had the Royal Commission, a lot of recommendations gone in place. You can see there's been an amazing amount of reform, but that process now needs testing. We need to, tweak it, refine it, improve it all the time. So the job never ends.
Yeah, thank you. We just had a comment there from a user, said it sounds like they're very strategic hires or placements for those non-executive director roles. And as I said in the outset, this is a topic for the ages. This is something that affects us all, although I am going to take that definition away of somebody who's old is always somebody who's 15 years old, older than I am. So I'm really liking that. When I get to 95, I'll be living that one. So Tracy, thank you very much for joining us today. We do have those vacancies live on the Women on Board's website, should anybody be wanting those. And I'm sure Tracy is also available from the National Ageing Research Institute, should anyone want to reach out to find out more about that as well. So thanks very much for joining me today, Tracy.